Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar today looking at Are You Fit for Farming? My name is Petra and I will be facilitating today's session on behalf of IOSH Rural Industries Group, introducing our guest speakers and weaving in any questions that you may have. So please, if you do have questions, pop them into the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We have had a bit of a last minute change of plan with our speakers today, unfortunately, but it does give me a little bit of time now to just talk through a few statistics. So I'm going to start off just by talking, most of you will be aware that working in agriculture means working in the industry with the highest risk of physical injury and work-related fatalities. And you may also be aware of the quite shocking statistics around mental health and death by suicide in the industry. Today, however, we are going to be looking at fitness in farming, focusing on some of the more hidden and maybe less well-known health issues that could impact people working in the agricultural industry. The HSE report that in the UK agricultural industry alone, around 12,000 people a year suffer from work-related illness. Musculoskeletal injury is over 3 times the rate for all other industries. The number of people affected by asthma is twice the national average. And on top of that, there are about 20,000 people a year affected by zoonoses, so diseases passed from animals to people each year. And lastly, my last stat for you, 23% of deaths from work-related sun exposure are in the agricultural workers, which equates to around 11 deaths a year and 55 newly diagnosed cases a year. So there's lots of health topics that don't often get aired. So our last minute change to the schedule, we were due to have 3 fabulous expert speakers today, but unfortunately we now only have 2. So unfortunately, Jim Pollard from the Men's Health Forum is currently quite poorly with COVID. It hasn't gone away yet, and therefore he's had to send his apologies. The Men's Health Forum, though, produces a set of manuals to cover men's health and mental health, and specifically has a manual called Fit for Farming, and they do a version for women called Fit for Farming Women, and that covers many of the health conditions that potentially can affect men and women working in the agricultural industry. Now, because Jim's not here, I will put the links to those publications in the chat for anybody who wishes to access them. They are available to purchase, but there is also a free online version that you can access with each of those publications, and also that will give you access to all of the other fantastic publications that the Men's Health Forum put out there. So we have 2 speakers today, and we're going to start by hearing from Kate Walker, who is the Managing Director at the Diabetes Safety Organisation. And Kate will talk to us about the effects of diabetes on a person's physical health, both short and long term, how to recognise symptoms and where possible avoid the onset. After Kate, our second speaker is Dr. Mavis Nye, and Mavis is the founder of the Mavis Nye Foundation, which was created to inspire and support victims of mesothelioma related to terminal cancers. I even managed to say mesothelioma then. I've been practicing all morning. Mavis is also known for raising awareness of asbestos exposure and providing support to those who are diagnosed with asbestos-related cancers. And again, coming from the agricultural industry, asbestos remains present in huge numbers of agricultural buildings and structures, and hundreds of farmers are exposed to asbestos, often without really fully understanding the implications of that. So we are going to start with Kate. So Kate, I've asked you to turn the camera on, which you've always done, and had a bit of wave, which is great, and unmute yourself and you can take over the screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petra, and thank you all for listening today. You get an extra little bit about diabetes because we have got a little more time today, but really it's a bit of a whistle-stop lunchtime tour around diabetes, its risks, and kind of what we can do and take away from today. I'll just share my slides with you. So the plan is just to, as I say, go through what diabetes is and then look at what could be done in quite an effective and easy mechanism. So to start with, whilst you're sat there having your lunch and hopefully not to upset too many, one of the things we need to recognise is what are those risks of diabetes? How do we score it? And this is a very simple thing that we use and is used a lot in the medical world to see what are the risks of diabetes. So if you want to think about the industry or score it for yourselves, either is fine, of what are that risk of pre-diabetes. And these are the sorts of things that we'll be touching on shortly around symptoms and impact. So you can start to look at what is your risk score, or when we think about the industry, what is a risk score as a whole for this industry? Hopefully not ruining your day today. So if we see here, for pre-diabetes, there's 12.6 million current in the UK with pre-diabetes. These are the sorts of things that we'd be looking at to see whether it's worth having a test, and we'll show the symptoms shortly. I did this at a haulage association and they were less than pleased with me, but it comes good. Follow through with me, don't get frustrated quite yet. Oh, my slides aren't. Hang on, there we go. So what is it we do need to know? So diabetes and the impact of it being invisible, and then its impact at work. So we've heard a few stats already. This is our one stat slide, so it's not too much for us. So there's 4.6 million people currently in the UK living with diabetes. 1 million of those are undiagnosed. And I can't see whether there's many gentlemen here, but often the NHS believe that many of those may be more men because they don't present, they're not as good at going to the GP, or time isn't allowed. And I think we need to recognise what those risks are as this industry, and there might be higher numbers than we realise. 700 people a day are diagnosed in the UK every day with diabetes. And as I said, it's 2.6 million now. It's a slightly older stats on the screen, pre-diabetes from that score we've just done. It's the leading cause of blindness in the working population. There's over 170 amputations a week from diabetes, and 75% of men who have diabetes suffer erectile dysfunction. Now, that might not be the stat you want to hear, gentlemen, but it's often the thing that causes people to go and do something when we start to see symptoms and how easy it is to manage this condition and potentially reverse it if it's caught early. So before we can hang the rest of the presentation, I suppose it's understanding what diabetes is. In its simplest understanding, it's a sugar intolerance. So if you imagine, I don't know what's in front of you, I love it when I'm in a talk because I can pick on somebody, but if you've got a cookie, you've had something sugary for your lunch, or you've missed lunch and just picked up something quick to listen to us, if you have sugar, your body will naturally, the sugar goes up and it will rise quite quickly. If, say, we've had a couple of biscuits with a cup of tea. As the blood sugar rises, if we don't have diabetes, the body will produce insulin from the pancreas and pull that blood sugar safely back down and keep us safe. So why do we need our body to not have high sugar? If you imagine a glass of sugary water and you dropped a dull coin into it, after a while it will shine that coin. So what's it doing to us inside? Now, we're not robots and we are not going to suddenly turn shiny, but actually what it starts to do, if our blood sugars stay high, we are undiagnosed, and we know there's over 1 million in the UK, blood sugars are staying high because the body can no longer produce insulin. Our body is getting damaged. That sugar starts to rot and eat away, and that's where we get the blindness, the damage to the back of the eyes. Manhood gets affected, again, damage to nerves and feet. The body can't heal them, or we lose sensation in the feet, which will become apparent and important shortly. So if we imagine, so type 1 diabetes is only 5% of those 4.6 million, and that's an autoimmune disease. Now, for people living with type 1, and I think from a manager's point of view, it's really important you do know the difference. Type 1s often get very frustrated that they're blocked into type 2s, and the conversation needs to be different because they're definitely on insulin, and the management of it, what they eat, they have to inject against, and lots of things make a difference. So we do argue that all companies really need to understand the difference between the two so the right conversation can be had. So for type 2s, it's progressive. It's often when the body can no longer produce insulin. So imagine that I'm in Birmingham, let's say I drove down to London in first gear. No one would be surprised that I got down there and that my engine was smoking or there was a problem with the car. If I drove back, fingers crossed, I remember to change gears, the engine's okay, I get back, I'm not in too much trouble when I get home because we denied it, and the engine is fine. If, however, I keep driving in first gear, at some point that engine's going to break or no longer work, and no one would be surprised. And, you know, there'll be a few words said. If we imagine our pancreas being that car engine, if we keep hammering that pancreas with sugar, stress, shift patterns can do it. There's a lot of factors, and there's definitely still a stigma with type 2 that it's only what you eat. There's not. It's a lot of factors. But if we keep hammering and hitting that pancreas, at some point it will start smoking. That's pre-diabetes. That's that signal, that warning sign, and we'll look at the symptoms in a second. Now, if, like I might have done once or twice, carried on driving in first, and at some point those signals, the warning signs get more, smoke happens or the next thing happens, and that's when we tip into type 2 and the body starts not to be able to do its job. At that point, we might still be able to do it with diet, or medication might be needed, right up to the need support with insulin. So type 2s can go onto insulin as well, but not necessarily the same regimes. And these are really important to help understand those that you're working with and to make sure the right stuff's in place. So we mentioned, we'll do size first. So from your specific industry, I've Googled the numbers, so I do apologise if 482 is not right. It's what Google told me, and it was the best I could find. So I hope that's all right. But if we take those numbers and we've modelled this based on clinical data to look at what are the sort of perception, or how many would we anticipate to have diabetes, and you can see here, with an industry of 482,000, we'd anticipate about 40,000 people to have diabetes. So 1 in 12 is the current statistics or prevalence in the UK. Of those, 8,700 do not know they have it. And they were the people we just talked about who may have had it for 5-10 years, may not feel their feet because they've ignored the symptoms, and now it's becoming a problem. And that can cause huge risks if they're driving or using any of that big machinery. And we did our pre-diabetes test at the start for those who did it, and there's a further 160,000 at risk or at pre-diabetes if we were taking these statistics. So, you know, they're numbers we need to take seriously, and they recognise who and what we're working around to support them. So these are the symptoms. One of the things we absolutely recognise as an organisation is that for many people, these symptoms are easy to brush off. Of course, I'm tired, I work long hours. Of course, I'm tired, I've worked through the night, all the complexities. I'm thirsty because I drank loads of coffee, or it's hot, therefore I went to the toilet. They're very easy symptoms to ignore or push aside. And we know it's easy to do that when we're busy. But if we carry on doing that and keep hitting the body, i.e. driving in first, the risk of complications or having it or it being more damaging is there. And so we always encourage, just go and get a test, you know, and I'll show you in a minute. It's some really straightforward solutions to improve your lifestyle, and we'll look at those, but also to ensure safety at work. So the two sides from a kind of a risk of diabetes are, we'll do undiagnosed first. We said so far about 1 million. I think it's significantly higher because that number was pre-COVID. And obviously those 700 a day haven't been diagnosed throughout that period. So if you imagine, so I've got a little one, Christmas Day, you've been up since 4, it's now 7 in the morning, you've had to have some sweets to kind of keep yourself going and hope that you can make it through the day. And you feel really high as a kite on sugar. That's undiagnosed. They're people whose body cannot pull the sugar levels down, and they're in that state. So not quite as aware, not as concentrated, impaired concentration. And as I say, the damage to the feet particularly, and people go, well, I'd know if I couldn't feel my foot. Well, I don't think so, because it becomes so gradual. We get used to those different sensations. And again, if that foot slips off a piece of machinery, what are those risks? You know, we can think of that dustbin line in Scotland. What are the risks or consequences if something like that was to happen? And then the other side is those who are on insulin, so type 1s and type 2s, and some of the other, there's a few other medications, tablets that can cause blood sugars to drop quickly. So with hypo, this is when blood sugars drop really suddenly and drop far too low, and people can act drunk or pass out. And this is where we need to ensure that there is sugar available. I think particularly in this industry, you know, if you're out and about, how do you ensure that you've got the right sugar to help someone come out of that situation? Especially now Lucozade had too much sugar taken out of it. People say jelly babies, but I don't know about you. This afternoon, I'd probably have sat and eaten them because it's Monday afternoon and we all need a pick-me-up. So kind of what do we need in place to ensure we're keeping everyone safe and those who are living with a condition? In terms of work, so what are we looking at and why are we looking at it in work? Why this and not something else? So diabetes risks are very, very, very serious if they were to happen. So from a safety side, loss of machinery, we know, driving accidents, and there is obviously under Health and Safety at Work Act, everything that can be done that is reasonable and practicable to ensure the safety of others. And I think it's this, if we know somebody is living with diabetes or we haven't checked to see if anybody is and asked the right questions, there is a risk there. Diabetes isn't always a disability, it would depend, but when we talk to lawyers, they suggest you always treat it as if it is, because then the right adjustments can be put into place. And then driving regulations are really interesting. On roads, which is where DVLA regulate, people living with diabetes who are on insulin must test every 2 hours whilst driving to ensure their blood sugars are at the correct level. At the moment, HSE are saying it is implied off-road, but we as an organisation are really encouraging people to understand that it needs to be managed and monitored, and just to help keep people safe that every 2 hours that they are testing. And you'll see for type 1, they've got sensors. There's lots of fantastic technology which can really help people with this. And then from a productivity risk, time off from work increases if people aren't managing their condition, well managed, and there's thousands of people really managing their condition fantastically. You know, it doesn't therefore change the life. There's no blanket bans in the UK. We can keep people safer and also increase their productivity or minimise absenteeism. On the safety side, 30% higher risks from motor collisions for those living with diabetes. This is often the case if they're not managing it. It doesn't happen if people are managing. As I say, if we as organisations can help people manage better, we'll all see a safer environment and improved safety and productivity. There's a compliance that we touched on in terms of being able to have the slides afterwards or seeing it on the presentation. It is important that we ensure everything is reasonable and that people can, if they've got needles, where are they putting them? If they're using sharps, and have they got somewhere to put their insulin if that's required to keep it cool? And as I say, if they're out and away, have they got some sort of sugar gel or glucogel to ensure that they can come up if they have a hypo? And it's important to recognise on a hot day, like with all science, insulin works at different speeds depending on the temperature. So they may have done everything absolutely perfectly, but it was a hotter day and something could change. And I think we need to really help support those living with this condition to keep safe. So we talked about hypos. Now there's no data in industry on what are those likelihoods of hypos. So we've again done a big piece. I haven't because it's outside of my pay grade, but someone's done a big economic modelling using clinical data and saying in a company of 1,000, how many people are likely to have a hypo? And you can see a mild hypo doesn't require assistance from anybody. There's about 251 a year, so 21 a month. But the staggering number is this severe hypo that requires assistance from someone else. And in a company of 1,000, we're looking at 1 to 3 per month. And if we put that across the industry, we can start to see those numbers rise very quickly. And we need to start to think, have we got everything in place to look after these people and ensure we're keeping them safe? Now, one of the challenges that we face, and I think people living with diabetes face, is massively a hidden epidemic. People don't want to come forward because they're fearful they might lose their job. We know it's not always easy to come forward because there's a stigma, there's a whole complexity. And then inside companies, we don't necessarily have the data because it might have been an accident. They may never have looked into why that accident happened and it was just put down as a near miss, but actually it could have been because of a diabetic episode. We are anecdotally hearing a lot, and when we go to companies, we get stories like you can see on the screen, but in terms of actually seeing it in the data, we're struggling. So any support from an organisation who's listening, you know, we'd be really open to conversations and just really trying to make sure that we can find this data and help improve the safety around it. From a productivity risk, again, model data, because it's really unavailable anywhere else. Looking at what are the impacts of someone having had a non-severe hypo, these ones. And actually, missed work hours from a non-severe hypo in a company of 1,000 could be up to 30 hours a week. We know that at the moment, shortage of staff, we know it's hard for retention. And one of the things that we really encourage as an organisation is to become diabetes safe, so people can come forward, they can share with no stigma, they feel safe, they know they're not going to lose their jobs, and then the right things can be put in place so this doesn't happen and time isn't missed and productivity isn't lost. So as an organisation, we support companies to put in place some's better, any support around diabetes. We've got a charter to help kind of give direction, support and courses. But what I wanted to touch on here, after spoiling your lunch with the first slide, is the one less in the bottom corner. So we know there's a huge stigma. We know people really struggle with diets, you know, Weight Watchers, 95% return rate. If it works, surely we just go once. You know, there's a few questions we could answer on that. So what can we do really individually and across this industry to support that change, the nudge, that next thing we could do a little bit better to improve our health? And the one less. So if you had one less spoonful of sugar in your coffee or tea, 6 cups a day would be 1 kilogram less a month. That's 12 bags of sugar. And if that's all you did after today, that would make a significant difference to health in a year, because that's 12 bags, or, you know, 10 years, 120 bags of sugar would make a difference to health. But if you don't have sugar, which is what I'm often told, what about if you had a can of pop less or a biscuit? You know, if you have 4 biscuits, maybe have 3 biscuits. By the end of the month, that could be up to 2 packets, depending how many you have, how often you have them, and so on and so forth. We can start to see that difference. And we think it's really important that we know diabetes is hard. We've got enough on in our working days, all the hours that you put in, the shift patterns, all of that staggering. Actually, it doesn't need to be complex. A small change like this would have a significant impact, both on your own individual health and across this industry as a whole. Just really to finish on is just understanding for those living with diabetes and those who aren't, that for those who aren't, we could be a support. Often if people are having a hypo, and that's that, you know, mid-morning slump, but even significant, they don't always know it's happening because it's happened too quick. If we can educate ourselves from today and from other work that we know how to help that person, we might be the person who spots they might even have diabetes, and you work together longer than maybe you're at home, or we can hear better than from, you know, our other half who we never want to listen to. What is that difference we could make from something like today, or learning a little bit more about diabetes and then doing one less? That's my slide deck done. I didn't know, Petra, are we doing questions now?
Yeah, I've got a question for you. Actually, I just wanted to reiterate one of the points that you've said, because I think for me it was quite an important sort of takeaway point, and that was that drivers with diabetes should be testing every 2 hours. Now, when we look at in the agricultural industry, we will have people operating large agricultural machinery and equipment for very long days. So whether that's on farmland or roads or a combination of the two, I would imagine that regular testing becomes even more important when you're looking at a 14, 16, possibly even more hour day. So. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it is a real challenge. And I think it's important to add, it's those who are on insulin have to test every 2 hours. And what's really, so I always have to show my arm, not that I have one, but the sensors that you see, someone like Theresa May had the little white sensors, they monitor blood sugar levels. Now, type 1s have access to them. And if you are type 1 and don't go and complain to GP, you have the right to. And it's exciting, they're just bringing out the same technology for type 2s living on insulin. So they can go and ask GPs, because then what happens is you just need your phone and you can scan. It takes away all the needles. It takes away the complexity of having to stop so often. So technology is coming out to make it a lot safer. And we're really working, trying to get the NHS to ensure those centres come out to people who need them in these sorts of roles. Because as you say, 16 hours and the temperature could be hot, the impact is quite staggering. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't suspect that the health and diet of your average combine tractor driver is that great, but I'll stand to be corrected if anybody on here. So we do have a question from Andrew Clark, which was typically, can people show one symptom or all the symptoms, or is it a selection of some of the symptoms when developing diabetes?
Yeah, no, it's a great question and not an easy answer. It can just be one that's repetitive. It could be all, but what's really hard at the moment is we're often seeing, and I think the statistic, don't quote me, I'm going to pull it out, it's somewhere here, about 30% don't have any symptoms. They often go with something else and then it's found. Now, I don't know whether there's no symptoms or we override them, you know, because they're so mild. So yes, and it could be any of them, one of them, and for some people it's none of them. They didn't know until they went for anything. And I would really encourage, and I know it's that nag, but to go and have those yearly MOTs when you are allowed to have them. You know, you do it for your machinery, everyone goes out and does it for their cars, but actually let's do it for ourselves, because if it's caught early, and I think this is the benefit of doing it around diabetes, if it's caught early, it can get put into remission without medication. You know, it's when we leave it, it's when we keep driving in first gear for too long, but actually caught early, you know, say I have maybe just left it in first, I can get out of that mix and not be in trouble when I get home because we've done it fast enough. So for me, it's really encouraging going and being tested on those yearly assessments, but equally, if you've got any concern, just go and get a quick blood test.
Thank you. And I just had a question, actually. So you were quoting some of the prevalence stats for the UK. Is the prevalence the same? We've got a worldwide audience with IOSH. Is it the same in other countries? Do you know what the prevalence is? I might be putting you on the spot here. But are there any significant differences depending on country and culture?
Yeah, no. So globally, it's 1 in 10. So we're seeing really high numbers, and it's every 7 seconds globally someone dies from diabetes around the world. It depends on the country. So at the moment, Mexico's rates are significantly higher because there's suddenly an increase in money. The sugar there, it's culturally, as you have money, you have sugar, and the same in South Africa. So there are certain areas. So China's the highest. It's up there with Mexico and America. India's really struggling, particularly rural areas. If anyone has specific data they want, we can get it all for you. But this is a global problem. The World Economic Forum are talking about it. The International Diabetes Federation are quite concerned. It is a rapidly rising statistic, and yeah, we're trying to say let's do something about it in industry, and let's kind of try and slow that curve down so we don't get to 1 in 10, although parts of England are in 1 in 10.
Thank you. So thank you. If anybody's got any further questions for Kate, we pop them in the Q&A and we can come back to them once we've heard from Mavis. So Mavis, our second and final speaker of today, your camera's on. If you unmute yourself and you can share your screen. Thank you very much.
Right, so good morning and thank you for asking me to talk. Farms to us walkers seem to be an idyllic place, and with programs like the Yorkshire, and with programs like the Yorkshire Farm we watch on TV and love and admire the way of life. Children running barefoot through the fields with miles of well-ploughed fields, birds singing, cows mooing, sheep bleating. Spring brings new life every year in animals and crops. But the truth is, there is a hidden killer, asbestos. Farms are particularly at risk as a high proportion of older buildings were constructed when asbestos was a common building product. Agricultural workers account for 1% of the UK workforce, but around 20% of worker deaths. Asbestos exposure can lead to many serious diseases, including mesothelioma, as well as lung cancer, but also the potential of asbestos exposure to family members, including children living on the farms. It's not just the health risk that farmers need to be aware of. There are also financial repercussions. There is a raft of regulations when it comes to managing asbestos on a farm. Asbestos regulations, well, farmers have been warned to take immediate action on asbestos within their premises or risk being fined. This follows a recent crackdown on poor health and safety standards within the UK. Farming. Employers responsible for managing farms in the UK are legally obliged to protect farm workers and visitors under the Health and Safety Act 1974 and Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012. As well as the serious risk asbestos exposure poses to health, non-compliance with asbestos regulations lead to hefty fines. Farmers therefore need to take decisive action to ensure that asbestos is being properly managed to negotiate these risks. A recent drive by HSE aims to improve health and safety in agriculture as part of its agriculture sector intervention plan. This plan was devised in response to the high numbers reported of work-related deaths, accidents and illnesses. As part of this new initiative, unannounced farm inspections are now carried out by the HSE. A survey will cost you about £300 to £750, depending on the size and age of buildings on a farm, and a management plan is required. Don't risk taking it out yourself and burying it. Whilst managing asbestos in addition to the already heavy workload farmers are faced, they may seem to be, sorry, I should have put that up. Whilst managing asbestos in addition to the already heavy workload farmers face may seem to be like a huge task, but this is one job that should not be put off. The risks associated with asbestos are too important, and it can be easily managed. The HSE do a good report on what a good farm looks like, and it contains information and advice to help farmers maintain and achieve asbestos compliance. Work-related deaths of the farmers as a result of asbestos exposure is a very sobering reminder to take health and safety serious. The danger of asbestos on farms has been cast in the spotlight after a farmer recently died of cancer caused by the fibrous minerals. A farmer from Dorset was diagnosed with mesothelioma in July 2019 and died just 2 months later. Mesothelioma, which is an incurable form of cancer, is caused by inhaling these asbestos fibres. The farmer reportedly grew up on a farm which had asbestos roofs and later married and moved to another farm which pulled down its asbestos buildings. Another case, a pig farmer was always building new pigsties and repairing roofs and saved over several years. And the risk of asbestos exposure in British farming has been highlighted in recent years by both the HSE and the number of asbestos-related illnesses and deaths. This is the problem that takes years for the disease to show. In my own case, it took 49 years. I suspected nothing, and I just lived a normal life. So that's a typical farm building. While the work the farmers do today is different from the work performed during the height of asbestos use in the mid-20th century, asbestos exposure remains a risk to farm workers. This shouldn't be so, but sadly it is. Much of the equipment and machinery used on the farm is known to contain asbestos. The older farm buildings include farmhouses, barns, silos, pens and sheds. And it can contain asbestos construction materials. Asbestos cement pipes were commonly used as field drains on the farm. Repair and maintenance of the equipment, maintenance of the equipment, machinery and farm structures could expose farmers to asbestos. Today, asbestos exposure on farms may come from machinery parts, including brakes, brake linings and other vehicle friction materials and gaskets. Farmers may also be exposed to asbestos in contaminated vermiculite products or contaminated soil in areas of natural occurring asbestos. Looking after the animals, digging up asbestos-laden soil, crop planting and maintenance with asbestos contaminated vermiculite are other sources of exposure. This bag of Zonolite brand soil conditioner contained asbestos tainted vermiculite from Libby, Montana. Montana is reported to have produced 80% of the world's supply of vermiculite when it operated from the 1920s through 1990. At 1963, a study of the Libby vermiculite found it contained 6.2% to 22% tremolite, asbestos. It also contained other fibrous minerals. This contaminated vermiculite was used by farmers throughout the US for agriculture and horticultural purposes and exported around the world. In 2000, the US Environmental Protection Agency conducted a study of vermiculite containing garden products in the US. Of the 38 vermiculite products tested, 17 of them contained asbestos. Of the 17 that tested positive for asbestos, 15 of them were soil mixed products. The other 2 were vermiculite packing materials. Zonalite chemical packaging vermiculite was labelled for use as packaging material, but it was offered for sale in 2 different retail stores for home gardening use. The source of a laboratory packing material was unknown to the agency, but it tested positive for asbestos. The agency recommends using vermiculite outdoors, keeping it damp to reduce dust and avoid dusty clothing into bringing it into the home. But how many times have you stood and watched a farmer plough his field and watched the dust that he produces, and then seen him in the pub drinking with his mates? That dust is all on his clothes. Really, you should have a shower every time you work, because our poor lungs have to cope with so much. The Zonalite brand has also made a soil conditioner decades ago, known as Terralite, that contained asbestos contaminated vermiculite from Libby. It was also in animal feed, fertilizers, pesticides, seed encapsulation, soil conditioning and potting, root cuttings, seed germination, sowing compost, just so much and so many things with asbestos hidden in it. But over the years, things are improving, I hope. But farmers may also be exposed to asbestos in the soil of their fields. Asbestos in soil may occur naturally, or it may have been added to the soil as a fertilizer or conditioning agent. Farms located near naturally occurring asbestos deposits may have the toxic mineral in their soil, but builders that fly tip on farmland and in the lanes of our countryside are endangering the farmer and his workers, as they are left with the huge problem of clearing this up. Okay, it might be clear, but asbestos is left to work into the soil and then ploughed into a field. The overall risk of asbestos exposure to most farmers is relatively low. However, farmers who unknowingly work on the land contaminated with asbestos fibre may face a moderate to high risk of exposure. Farms located in flood zones are at risk of asbestos soil contamination. After flood events, the story goes on and on. Another reason we must stop fly tipping. Asbestos containing brake linings, that asbestos is in animal feed, which is another thing that, they're being fed it, which is amazing because then we eat the food. So asbestos friction materials, gaskets, insulation and heat panels were used in farming equipment because asbestos made these products heat resistant. Farmers who replace brake linings on tractors are especially at risk of potential harmful asbestos exposure. Dust-free, wet methods of brake replacement are recommended to limit this. Asbestos projects found on farming equipment or machinery included gaskets. Asbestos gaskets act as seals to prevent fires on machinery that generate heat. Brakes, asbestos brakes and brake linings used on tractors and other equipment may still contain asbestos, even in new products. Clutches for use on tractors are another friction material, which continue to be made with asbestos. Spray-on asbestos coatings act as a form of insulation for machinery. Asbestos-containing insulating panels were applied near engines between seats and heat sources to contain the heat. Hood linings. The hood linings of tractors and other machinery were likely to contain asbestos because it is so heat resistant. But asbestos in asbestos in farm buildings are still here today. Most farms are likely to contain asbestos building material. People seeking reclaimed barn wood from barns and farmhouses should be aware of the potential for asbestos contamination. The wood may contain traces of asbestos insulation, and it could bear asbestos-containing paint or varnish. Farmers used asbestos cement as a roof repairing material. And asbestos cement was used to make many different types of products. And it's also used as a roofing material. For example, leak-proof asbestos plastic roof cement was marketed to the farmers as a patching material and roof adhesive. Shingles. Asbestos cement shingles were applied to the roofs of farmhouses to prevent fire damage. And then, of course, the corrugated sheets that we use for roofing. And very often they would take these down and the farmer buries it instead of having it disposed of, so there it is in the ground. A case in the UK where a farmer died of mesothelioma was found that the roof of his building was double skin insulated asbestos, but the walls were compressed straw slabs or balls insulated and covered with roofing felt. He would scrub the walls to keep the livestock clean and free from disease, and the case was proved because the wall balls were used as finished wall surfaces, which also included drywall, also containing asbestos for its strength and durability, and there he is scrubbing it. Different types of asbestos insulation include spray-on coatings, loose-fill insulation, wrap insulation, where used on buildings on farms. Farmers may also use loose-fill insulation in attics of farmhouses and other buildings. And then, of course, there's guttering and exhaust pipes. Farmers have to notify local agencies if they plan to renovate or demolish buildings on a farm that contain a certain threshold of asbestos. Also, there are specific safe practices for asbestos removal and disposal. Farmers are also required to inform farm workers of the areas that contain asbestos, so workers can take precautions to avoid exposure. Research has documented the risk of asbestos exposure among farmers and cases of asbestos-related diseases. But actually, I looked for figures of how many people have died with mesothelioma, and I can't find it listed anywhere. So I'm beginning to wonder if it's listed under other trades. I don't know. I still will look into that. Research has documented the risk of asbestos exposure amongst farmers and cases of asbestos-related disease. After floods recede, dusty conditions increase the risk of asbestos exposure for farm workers. Mesothelioma is a type of cancer that is only caused by asbestos exposure. Exposure to asbestos also causes other types of cancer, including lung, ovarian, throat. Asbestos exposure also caused a progressive and incurable pulmonary disease known as asbestosis. Farmers have successfully sued manufacturers of asbestos products that cause them to develop related illnesses. So just be aware that the dangers of the dangers, and wear masks, protect and wear PPE, and also shower after work. So that's a cement desk, but that's a Libby mine, just to show. But Russia has got many, many mines like that. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mavis. Thank you. So I've got a couple of points for you. One from Alan Plump. I don't know if you can see it in the chat, but basically this saying that in the 1980s, the HSE had enforcement campaign to remove asbestos insulation, particularly from potato stores. And he was saying how horrifying it was to see workers sat on bales of straw covered in asbestos fibres, eating their sandwiches, no washing facilities. And a point made there was wondering, you know, what happened, and were any deaths associated to mesothelioma, which I now can't say again. And another point about asbestos waste given away to farmers so that they could compact it down into making roadways. And certainly the other issue we see a lot is where asbestos has been stripped off buildings previously, and then because it costs to get rid of, it's been historically buried into farmland, and then obviously creating more of an issue. So
yeah, I think it needs some better regulations. I sort of really have delved into it this week, you know, and we need to have better figures at this, and they're not treating it like you would a factory. And it seems there is something lacking, you know, so I don't know. It needs more regulations and more laws.
Yes, it's interesting. IOSH members on the call, I don't know if any of you have already read this month. I'm going to flash it up there, try and get it in the camera without it disappearing. This month's SHP have some stats from the WHO and the ILO about work deaths and diseases. And one of the stats, they say that since 2000, deaths attributable to occupational exposure to asbestos have gone up 81.9%, which is huge. And yet, as you say, it's quite difficult to pinpoint down stats related to the agricultural industry.
I don't think they're listing it under farm workers. I can't find proper figures for farm workers. So whether they do come under other trades, I don't know. I think
we'll see if we can find out.
Yeah, we'll have to really research this.
And I don't think there are currently any more questions. So unless anybody's got any quick ones they want to pop in the chat, that basically will bring us to a close. So if you do have if anybody on the webinar does have any questions that occur to you later, you can direct them through to the Rural Industry Group email address. We're more than happy to respond, and contact Kate and Mavis separately if you've got specific questions for them as well. More than happy to do that too. So Ben has popped the poll on the screen. So if you wouldn't mind giving us your feedback on today's webinar. And again, apologies that we couldn't have our full repertoire of wonderful guests today. But we will try and get Jim on a future webinar, because I think it's well worth spending some time listening to everything that he has to say. And if you've got any ideas for future content, things that you would like the Rural Industries Group to put on in future webinars, please again do let us know through the RIG email address. So thank you very much to both Kate and Mavis. It's been an absolute pleasure and very interesting. Almost hour. So thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for everyone attending.